Hi, welcome back to my channel, The Gentle Flamingo. I want to thank you all for your patience. I know it's been a long time, but I am finally getting to part 3 of my nerdy Gurdy build, where we are going to get up to start shaping this wheel. Now I'm going to do a little bit of prep to this wheel beforehand because I'm a little leery now, because I think I got this wheel on my Gurdy in the rough a little bit too small because of the way I cut it and how much shaving and shaping I had to do to get it in the round on the Gurdy. It ended up just a little bit too small. If you look at the drone bridge over here, you can see that I had to do quite a bit of shaving off or filing to get the string where it would actually go onto the wheel, make some little bit of contact with the wheel. And same thing over here on my trumpet bridge. If you engage the strings, they don't actually touch the wheel at all. So I don't know if I'm actually going to try to fix that later on. Probably not, depending upon how this other Gurdy turns out. Hopefully it'll turn out okay. But I did get the wheel a little bit too small. So in order to avoid that, we're going to do a little something different with this wheel. Before I do this, I just want to make sure you know that this step is not in the assembly instructions and is not necessary with laser cut parts. It's just something that I want to try and can put to use if I ever decided to be masochistic and build another Gurdy from scratch. I'm going to make my own wood filler using the sawdust from my Gurdy in the rough and wood glue, mixing in the glue until I get the consistency I'm looking for. Then I'll spread it all around the rim of the wheel. And set it by the wood heater to dry. Again, this step is not in the assembly instructions. I'm just experimenting a little. While the wheel is drying, I'll head out to the shop and work on assembling the crankshaft. The first thing I need to do is cut my threaded rod. The assembly instructions call for 8mm threaded rod, but this particular rod is 5/16. I live in the US, so metric is a little hard to find at local hardware stores. I need 2 pieces of threaded rod, one that is 6.5 centimeters long and one that is 22 centimeters long. So I'll mark those measurements onto my threaded rod. And then before I put the rod in the vise to cut it, I'm going to wrap a towel around it to protect the threads. And then it's just a matter of getting my hacksaw to cooperate with me. Next, I'll file the cut ends to remove any burrs and unevenness. And then make sure that my 5/16 hex nuts thread on easily. Now I'll move on to putting the bearings into my handle knob. You'll see that my bearings don't quite fit. There's a little bit of a warp to the openings that will need some sanding to even out. Please note, this doesn't mean that my kit maker did anything wrong. No 3D printer is perfect, no matter how well it's calibrated, and there will always be some inconsistencies. So don't be surprised if you need to do a little bit of work to get your bearings to fit in the knob right. Anybody else pace while sanding a part? Am I just weird? Okay, After a bit of pacing and elbow grease, I can press fit the bearings into the knob. I'll use a bit of dowel and a hammer to gently set them into place. And then put the 6.5 centimeter rod through to make sure everything lines up all right. Next, I'm going to work on the crank handle just a bit to round out the edges and make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. This is another step that is not necessary, so skip it if you like. I went ahead and painted and finished the crank handle and also painted the outside part of the end block before assembling the crankshaft. This will make finishing the Gurdy a little bit easier for me once it's all put together. For the next part of assembling the crankshaft, I'll need the knob with the bearings, the handle, the 6.5 centimeter threaded rod, 2 5/16 hex nuts, and 1 5/16 nylock nut. First, I'll thread one of the hex nuts onto my threaded rod just until the end of the rod is flush with the outside edge of the nut. Then, the threaded rod goes through the small end of the handle so that the hex nut fits into the hexagonal cutout. Next, I'll thread the other hex nut onto the other end of the rod and run it all the way down until it's finger tight against the handle. And then use a crescent wrench to tighten it the rest of the way. Then the knob goes on. Now, I don't have enough of the threaded rod coming through the knob for the nylock nut to lock on. This is probably because the particular bearings I purchased are a little too fat. I'll just put another hex nut on and keep an eye on it. If I start having problems with it loosening and coming off, I can put some Loctite or epoxy or something on the threads later to keep that from happening. I did have to readjust this nut a few times to make sure that the knob would turn on its bearings, though. You can end up getting it too tight, so play around with it to get it turning like you want. Next, I'll take my 22 centimeter threaded rod and thread 2 hex nuts onto it and run them down a little bit so that I can put the end of the rod through the round hole on the big end of the handle. Then, just like I did for the smaller end, I'll thread on a hex nut until it's flush with the end of the rod, fit it into the hexagonal cutout, and then tighten up the hex nut on the other side. The next part of the assembly is to set the rod into the back bearing on the outside part of the end block. To do this, I'll put the outside part of the end block in place, prop everything up so you can see what's going on, and then put my threaded rod through until the end is just through the front bearing on the inside brace. I'll then run this hex nut up to the back bearing. Now, since my bearings have an inside diameter of 8 millimeters and my threaded rod is 5/16 of an inch in diameter, there is a little bit of wiggle room between them. To try to remedy this, I'm going to use a piece of vinyl electric tape around the threaded rod where it will go through the bearing. For my Gurdy in the rough, I used aluminum tape for this, but it was difficult to take off when I needed to, so I'm using electrical tape for this Gurdy. This is just my solution and by no means the best solution. There are some pretty good discussions about it though on the Nerdy Gurdy Builders Facebook page, which is linked in the description. This page has a nifty little search feature where you can search for the specific thing you're looking for and not have to scroll for hours trying to find it. Let's just recheck the position right quick before threading on another hex nut, getting it finger tight around the bearing, and then getting it securely tight with a couple of crescent wrenches. one more check of the position just to be extra sure. The final part of this crankshaft assembly is getting the wheel on. The assembly instructions have some measurements to follow if you want to, but I like to eyeball it. I'll start with the wheel hub. My kit came with 2. And I'm going to use this one. Now I've already worked with it a bit to make sure it will thread onto my threaded rod, so I'll show you what I did with it with the other one. Since these hubs are printed from the back plate up, they might have some irregularities in the plastic here that will make it a little difficult to get it started on the threaded rod. I'm just going to trim those irregularities off with an X-Acto knife and then get it started on this leftover piece of threaded rod. It only goes on a little ways before it's too hard to turn by hand, so I'll thread it on the rest of the way with a wrench. All the way on, and then back off. And then one more time just to make sure everything's good. Now let's get the hub into the wheel. First, I'll trim the dried bits of filler off the sides of the wheel and then get a few of the larger lumps off the rim. Alright, that'll work for now. Let's see how this hub fits. It will go through the center of the wheel, but it doesn't fit flat to the side of the wheel because this particular wheel slid off to the side a little when I glued it together. I'll need to do a little bit of careful filing to fix it and checking the fit often. If you're more careful than I was while gluing the 2 sides of the wheel together, you probably won't need to do this. Alright, now it fits. I'm going to mark the wheel and the hub to make sure I put them together the same way every time. You'll be surprised how much alignment can change when you don't put things together in the same orientation every time. To continue assembling the crankshaft, I've clamped the body of my Gurdy to a stable surface so I can work on it without it moving around on me. And now the shot is flipped because I'm filming with the camera on the screen side of my phone. You can see I've threaded 2 hex nuts onto the threaded rod. If you're using the smaller hub, you can go ahead and thread that on too, making sure that the back plate is towards the end block. Since I'm using the larger hub and it doesn't fit through the hole in the T-brace, I'm going to have to thread it on after guiding the rod through this brace. Then I'll fit the wheel onto the hub and keep working it down the rod until it's in position in the slot on the top of the Gurdy. Once I'm satisfied, I'll run the 2 hex nuts up to the wheel hub and tighten them against each other so they serve as a stop for the hub. Now you can probably see how wobbly and unstable this wheel is right now, so let me take you over to the table to show you what I plan to do about it. First, I sanded down the small end of the hub so that it no longer sticks out past the side of the wheel. Now, when I get the hub and wheel onto the rod, I can put a large washer and another hex nut on to hold the wheel straight. And here it is back on the Gurdy. Looking at it from the top, you can see that the wheel is more or less in the center of the slot. And although it does still have a little bit of a wobble, according to my research and the Nerdy Gurdy Builders Facebook page, it's within the acceptable range since it's only about 1 millimeter. And just to let you know, I did use another bit of vinyl electrical tape to get a little tighter fit between my front bearing and the threaded rod. It's not on there very neatly, it will be a little neater in the final assembly. Okay, now it's all set up to start shaping the wheel, which I will do in my next video. Thank you all for joining me for part 3 of this Nerdy Gurdy build, and I'll see you soon for part 4 where I'll get this wheel into shape. Sandy. Hey, baby. Hi, I'm back. Just a little tag to let you know what's going on with my upload schedule. As I've said in a couple of my weekly poetry videos, I did start a new job back in October, and I did not realize how lazy I had become in the time between graduating from school and getting the job. So I am ashamed to admit that I have been exhausted in the evenings on the weekdays and have been using the weekends to recover. All that to say, I've finally gotten things back on track, and I plan to upload a making video every other Wednesday. There are several projects on my list besides this nerdy Gurdy that I'm looking forward to sharing with all of you. And if you like the poetry videos, they will still show up as extra videos from time to time. Again, thank you all so much for being patient with me while I get these things figured out. I hope you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in about a week and a half with part 4 of this nerdy Gurdy build. Bye.